This man typed this message using only his brain. No hands, no keyboard, nothing but thoughts. So what's so crazy about that? Well, the thing is, he was paralyzed. In fact, he hadn't moved a muscle in 6 years, and yet he was able to use his mind to write out an entire sentence. This was the world's first brain-computer interface, a direct link between the human brain and the digital world. But it gets even crazier because all he had to do was think of the letters. The computer did the rest. It instantly decoded his brain signals and translated them into text. He didn't have to painstakingly spell things out one by one like you see in other brain interface demos. No, with this tech, he could just write whatever he wanted as fast as he could think it. The very first thing he wrote was, "I am typing with my mind." How insane is that? But here's where things get really dark. This isn't some sci-fi movie, it's real life. It happened in 2021. And these are not concept renderings. They are actual photos of the technology used in the experiment. The chip itself, the surgical robot, the VR headset, the computer running the algorithm. All of this exists right now, and it will change the world forever. So let me catch you up on this and show you what's coming next. This paralyzed man's name is Gertjan Oskam. 6 years before the experiment, he suffered a severe spinal cord injury that left him unable to walk. But thankfully, he retained control over his arms. So in early 2021, he decided to do something crazy, sign up for a clinical trial led by doctors at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. They were testing out a new brain-computer interface called the First Wave Surgical System. It was developed by a company called Neuralink. You might have heard of them. They're Elon Musk's Neurotech startup. Their mission is to create ultra-high bandwidth brain-machine interfaces that can treat neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, and spinal cord injuries. Now, their approach is pretty extreme. It involves implanting tiny wires directly into the brain. These wires are so thin they look more like threads. So the procedure is basically like sewing together the brain and the computer. In Gertjan's case, the wires were placed in part of his brain called the motor cortex. That's the area responsible for planning and coordinating movement. Each wire contains about 1,000 electrodes, and when they're all put together, they form a little grid that can read the electrical activity happening in the brain. Now, electrical activity is what all neurons do. They send signals to each other by firing off electrons. It's kind of like how your phone sends messages by emitting radio waves. But instead of transmitting data through the air, neurons pass signals directly through the body's wiring. By sticking a bunch of electrodes into the brain, you can intercept those signals and translate them into something useful like text or speech. In Gertjan's case, the electrodes were picking up signals related to movement. When he thought about moving his hand, specific groups of neurons started firing. So, if he was thinking about moving his hand up, one group of neurons would light up, and if he was thinking about moving his hand down, a different group of neurons would activate. By decoding which neurons were firing, the computer knew exactly what he was thinking about. Now, once they figured out how to read his brain signals, the researchers needed to figure out how to show him the results. For that, they hooked Gertjan up to a VR headset made by another neurotech company called Connexon. It's a wireless device that reads signals from the brain and translates them into virtual movements. With this headset, Gertjan could see his own hand in VR. Whenever he moved his hand in real life, the virtual hand moved along with it. So now we've got a brain sending signals, a chip recording those signals, and a VR headset translating them into virtual movements. All that was missing was a way to turn thoughts into text. That's where the fun began. Because it wasn't enough to just show Gertjan a virtual version of his hand. He couldn't move anything else. So the scientists created a little training program inside VR. They showed him a ball and some paddles and taught him how to use his mind to move them around. Once they mastered that, they expanded the experiment to include buttons and levers and dials and all sorts of widgets. Then, finally, they introduced a keyboard. They showed him a letter and asked him to focus on it with his mind. After a while, they expanded the experiment to full sentences. At first, it was really slow going. Gertjan had to painstakingly select each letter one at a time. But eventually he got the hang of it, and before long he was able to write out an entire sentence without stopping. The words appeared on the screen faster than he could have typed them on a keyboard. That's because the chip was reading his brain signals so fast. It was taking thousands of measurements per second and filtering out all the noise to find the meaningful patterns. The scientists published their findings in the journal Nature. They were thrilled with the results. This was the first time anyone had been able to communicate using only brain signals. Not one character at a time, but whole words and sentences. It was a huge breakthrough for restoring vision in blind people, movement in quadriplegics, and speech in those who have lost the ability to speak. But it also raised a lot of questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and free will. Because if we can start reading people's brains, then we can start manipulating them too. We could trick them into doing things they don't want to do, or force them to think things that aren't true. That's why it's important that this technology is developed responsibly with safeguards in place to protect against misuse. Now, the implications of this technology are far-reaching. If we can start reading people's brains, then we can start treating neurological disorders in new ways. People with Parkinson's disease could be given implants that help them move normally. Those with epilepsy could have chips that detect seizures and send signals to the brain to stop them. And quadriplegics could be given devices that allow them to walk again. The possibilities are really endless. And you know who's excited about this? Elon Musk. He thinks that brain-computer interfaces are the future of humanity. In fact, he's already working on a new version of the technology that will be smaller, more efficient, and easier to install. His goal is to create a device that can be wirelessly charged so people wouldn't have to worry about getting their implants tangled up or electrocuted. He also wants to create a device that can be installed through a small incision without leaving a big scar. He thinks that this technology could eventually merge with artificial intelligence to create something truly special, a symbiotic relationship between humans and machines. Now, I know this sounds like science fiction, but Elon's not the only one working on this. There are dozens of startups and research labs around the world developing new ways to read the brain. Someday soon, this technology will be mainstream. So what happens when thoughts become commands? Well, that's for you to decide. What do you think of this technology? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to learn more about artificial intelligence, check out my other videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.